Hello, everybody. Austin Falingo here with JamPlay.com. Sad day, but I hope you learned a lot. But it's sad because this is the final week of creating jazz melodies. Just to recap, we learned a lot, right? I mean, we learned about the 2-5-1 progression, which we're going to get into today again. All kinds of stuff, using melodies with arpeggios, scale tones, scalular things. What else did we talk about? We hopefully learned a whole bunch of tunes, right? I mean, obviously different melodies. I would recommend going back and learning, the melodies. Contrafact was the big word for this series, right? Which is a chord progression with a different melody over it. So pretty much that's what we did. Most of the entire, most of these lessons here. So like I said, it kind of gives you an arsenal of 11 tunes. Today, not as much of a tune. We're going to cover more like 2-5-1 kind of stuff, but rhythmic displacement, right? All kinds of stuff. So so welcome to the last part of this series. Remember, it's all archived. If you ever want to watch them again, you have all the supplemental material to download. You have the tracks with the melody, without the melody. So hopefully super useful. So what are we going to do today to wrap this up? So today, we're not going to really learn a tune, like I mentioned. What we're going to do is we're going to take the 2-5-1 progression, both major and minor, right? So minor or major 2-5-1 would be like a minor 7th chord to a dominant 7th chord. And if you remember the minor 2-5-1, we have a half diminished chord or a minor 7 flat 5 chord to a dominant 7th chord. Right? So, like I said today, excuse me, my allergies are crazy still. So today what I did was fairly simple progression. Now, before we go over everything and the chords and stuff, there's not a whole lot of chords, so I'm being easy on you, right? But I recommend you can use any of these groups that we've learned, right? So we're in the key of C today. No sharps or flats to read. We start on a 2 minor, right? So D minor 7 in the key of C to a G7 to a C chord again. And then we turn it around with a minor 2-5-1, which is a super, super common way to get back to a 2-5-1. We're going to cycle that a few times. And really the fun thing today, like as you're seeing, it's called manipulating the 5 chords. So what we're also going to do, if you remember last week, and then it was several weeks back, we're going to talk about 2 ways to manipulate a 5 chord. And that's going to be using a tritone substitution, right? So if you remember back when we talked about that, what is a tritone? A tritone is a flat 5, sharp 11. Most people are going to call it a flat 5, away from the 5 chord. So in this tune, we're in the key of C, D minor is 2, G is 5. So what you kind of have to do is do a little math there and go, well, what is the flat 5? And if you remember several lessons ago, I said from strings 6 and 5, right? And this was also known as the Devil's Fifth. It was banned by the church for a while because it's a very kind of ugly sounding interval. But if you can use it really well, it can give you a great outside sort of sound and totally surprise the listener. Right, so coming from string 6, if you grab that note right there, that's your D flat, right? That's the flat 5 of G. So you always want to think in relationship to that 5 chord, right? Or 5 of something. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a D flat Lydian dominant scale, and we're going to superimpose that over G7. Super cool sound. Like I said, it's a thing you sort of want to use sparingly. We did it in the contrafact with the girl from Ipanema. I can't remember what I called that tune. I think The Man from California, right? So that was several lessons back. But we're going to use that. And then like last week, remember when we superimposed a melodic, a 4 minor 6 chord, right? Last week we started with a progression that started 4 minor 6. That's what we're going to, that's the other altered type sound we're going to do. And everything's laid out. Like I said, we'll get to that in a second. So it's, everything in the positions and everything is correct. Here's another thing about that, right? Let me look at my notes. So those are the altered scales we're going to use. Now the thing is a lot of times when this happens, and like this has happened so many times, it happened to me the other day on a gig. It works both ways, meaning you can do this kind of stuff, play a D flat Lydian dominant over the G7. Now the thing is there's a lot of notes in common, like the thirds and the sevenths, right? Like the flat 7 is the 3 of D flat, right? So F, but then F, in relationship to D flat is the third, but also in relationship to G, it's the flat 7, and then the flat 7 of D flat, right, is the C flat note. It's a little wonky because it's D flat, so there's a lot of flats there, right? But it's also the B note, which is the third of G. Hold on one second. Let me turn this delay off. Boom. Okay, cool. So that's going to be one device, and like I said, then what we're going to do is we're just going to take the F melodic minor scale and we're going to use it over the 5 chord as well. And we kind of have just essentially just several licks, and if for lack of a better word, to kind of get into hearing this sound. Like I said, you have the track as well without the melody, so it's great to just to run these yourself or take a couple notes. Simple motifs like we've talked about a whole bunch, in this series, and do that to get the scales under your fingers. Okay, so with that being said, like I mentioned, the bass is going to stay the same. Now, sometimes, like on my gig the other day, somebody said, "Oh, I'm picking up on that." So he starts switching to D flat, which makes it sort of a more uniform sound, right? Because the notes that aren't the thirds and the sevenths, it sounds a bit better. But either way, this is a great device to kind of get the outside sound. One more thing, disclaimer about this, right? It's very important, and this is why I'm showing you the scales, and you'll see when we get more in depth and talk about this. It depends on the kind of players you're with. Some people don't like that kind of sound. Some of these you're going to notice, like at the end, sort of on the turnaround with this, it's a little out there, right? It sounds very cool, and once your ear gets used to it, I mean, it's a very, very popular thing, in jazz music, 100%. But it's one of those things I'm just going to say you want to take with a grain of salt. And, some of you might be like, that's maybe a little too out there. So it's good to know how to do it. And when you hear other people do it, you will most definitely have these devices at this point. But yeah, like I said, we're manipulating the 5 chord. Okay, so let's give the track a play. I'll play it so you can see how it looks on your hands. Remember, like, everything is correctly fingered out. I only did a select few chord progressions or grips for this, but let's give it a listen, and then we'll get through it here. So here we go. Yeah, we're in the key of C, BPM 100. Like I said, you have the track with the melody without. Here we go. Okay, I'm going to play that one more time and just point out where the true manipulation is, right? There's a tag at the end, obviously, right? And then there's a couple of fancy chords. We do use some smaller kind of drop 2 inversions on that second turnaround, and then we end with a 6/9, which we're familiar with no root. One more time we'll listen, and before I play it, and I'll point out. You can already hear it, but just This is good, so. All right, D flat. See, it's tense. And then we correct back to the, there's the minor 2-5, now we're back to major. See, there's your 4 minor over the 5, the F melodic minor. D flat again. Acquired taste a little bit, but it's a cool device. Now that could be melodic minor or D flat. Pretty inside the box there, just chord tones over the G. Slightly altered there as well. And then we end with a 6-9, right? Okay, so let's play it and then we'll get into it some more. All right. All right, here we go. Keep that motif going here. Just keep building it up, you know, scale-wise. Right, so that's how we'd play it. Like I said, the fingering's all correct. Okay, so with that being said, all right, now let's kind of get into the meat and potatoes of it, right? So, if you look at your handy-dandy sheet here, titled Manipulating the 5 Chord. So, what I'm doing, and you've heard me say this a million times, I know I sound like a broken record, but consistency, you know, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? So, I'm choosing D minor 7th like this, right? So, remember, that looks like a G7 sus with just the middle 4 strings. Right, guide finger. I have my pinky sliding back to grab that G7 right there. So we have, right? Now I'm choosing a C chord with just a G in the bass. Now could you use a C6-9, a C6 like this? Sure. A C major 7 like this? Absolutely. Sometimes I will say, this is just personal taste, I kind of stay away from that. That's like a very, very jazzy kind of ballad chord to me, where like a 6, you know, it's just not as flashy. It's not as look at me, right? So we got C. Now your standard E half diminished right there to A7, right? Right, and then back to D minor 7. Back to C, same thing again. Right? And you can kind of make choice here. You can either do, you know, your E minor 7 like that, and you can do an A7 with a 3 on the 3rd, or the C sharp note. Or you can use the pinky. 1, 2, 3, 4 split bar, right? And then we kind of have the turnaround at the end. So chords wise, it's not too bad today, right? Then just C. Here, I'm just looking at our chart here. C over G, same thing. C. Same thing again. is just taking the root off, right? But don't let that hold you back, right? You can always do the D minor 7 like this. And then if I did that, like in all the previous lessons, I would use the guide finger of, you know, with the third finger there. Right? And then C. Or you can use a C6 or whatever. Remember too, like when we solo, you know, I'm keeping it, and we're gonna go over the arpeggios and everything too, but I like to keep everything in the same area just so you can kind of see everything, right? So, like I said, I'm not taking, you can use any chord you want, but like, we're not really gonna be up here, right? Totally fine. We've done that a bunch, you know, the D minor 7. Second finger on the root, you know, with the mini bar with your third finger, and then the G7 with the D in the bass, or the G7 like this, right? So those are all good options. That one, this one, which is, you know, as advertised in this, right? But that feels really good. And remember too, I know I'm a broken record, but when you're reading, when you're playing fast, it's really good to have those grips under your fingers, and with the help of the guide finger that kind of keeps you in check, you know, with just muscle memory. So, you know, pick whichever ones you want, but, you know, I like to work smarter, not harder, right? So we have that, you know, but this is totally fine too. Or this, they're kind of out of area, but it is, you know, same chord, slightly, you know, that's a nice meaty chord that works, especially for rhythm guitar playing. And then you can do a C6 like that, right? And then right there, you're right next to the E minor 7, flat 5, or the E half diminished, to A7, and then back to the same. So with that being said, there's our chords. C6, we'll get to that in a little bit, but that's obviously, it's like a mini bar with your second and third finger. And that always works nicely. Right? And then the other kind of chords, which we're going to get to, I'll just go ahead and show them to you. So what we have here, right, and the reason why I did this, and then before we start at the second lick where we go, I'm splitting it up. Like, we've done some chord stuff. We did it last week, I think, maybe a couple weeks before that as well. It's just, break it up. You don't have to do single line solos all the time, meaning one note at a time, or, you know. So up here, it's all marked correctly, right? But there's your E minor 7 flat 5. Kind of a weird grip, but great chord. And what I'm doing is I'm building a line down by doing that, by going. So we have, right? And, you know, here's the thing too, like, don't look at these as grips either. You always want to do the math with it, right? So, okay, what note is that? Well, there's our D note, right? Which is the flat 7 of E minor 7 flat 5, or E half diminished, right? Then we have the flat third, which is the G note. There's the flat 5, which is the B flat, and then the root on top. Right? And then here, this is an A7 flat 9. So that's coming from one of our 16 inversions. We've talked about that, but if anybody wants to ask me a question at the end, it's a good conversation, you know? So there's your A7, but you move this one up, and it's an A7 flat 9. Right? And really, it also looks like a diminished chord. And on guitar, you know, gypsy jazz, that's a popular thing to do. Spanish guitar things, because they're stacks of minor thirds, right? A diminished chord, and on guitar, every 3 frets or every minor third being 3 frets, that works out really nicely, right? Also, too, if you want to know the theory real quick behind that, an A7 is a secondary dominant in the key of C. It's a 6 secondary dominant. So remember when we talked about diatonic chord progressions, technically, just if we played straight up C scale, the 6th degree harmonically, like with a chord, would be an A minor 7. But it's not that in this case, right? It's an A7, and that tends to take a Phrygian flat 9 type vibe. So that's why that works very well. Now remember, this is just, there's nothing, there's no extension in this, right? This is just root third, fifth, root minor third, flat 5, and then flat 7 in the E minor 7 flat 5. And then this is an A7 on top with the flat 9 in the bass, right? And then we hit the triad here, right? And then we're back to the Lydian type thing, right? Okay, so with that being said, understanding kind of the fancy chords, where they come from. Now, arpeggio-wise, everybody's always tempted, I know, but it's good to just see where everything is outlined, right? So our first chord is D minor 7. So this actually goes back to like week 1 when, I can't even remember the melody, but we did Saturn, what was it? Silky Doll, right? And that was the contrafact on Satin Doll. Great tune, Ellington tune. Go back, like I said, and learn those melodies. I mean, with this course, you at least, like I said, you learn 10 tunes, right? So, you know, here's my D minor 7, right? And always, any way you can see it is great, but I'm kind of thinking of the arpeggio right here. Right? D minor 7, root, flat third, 5, root, flat third, 5. That's the flat 7 if you wanted to put that in there, but as long as you see where the, you know, the bones are, that's good. G7 coming from this shape. Right, that always works. Charm. And then C is right here. Right, and then E minor 7. So D minor 7. There's the first lick. Right? And G7's there. C. Okay, now here's the next step with that, right? And you're going to have your scales outlined. So what you want to do next, and we're going to get into this in a second, but what we're doing is we're imposing D flat over G, right? But like I said, it's very important to see G and then understand the flat 5 concept from that, right? So just think like this, D minor 7, and then just like C, but up a half step, right? Because technically, with the lick we're playing, we're going... right, and it gives it all that tension. Like I said, the third and the seventh are the same. They both of those notes are in common with G and D flat. You know, one being a flat 7, one being a third, and then it flops to the flat 7 and the third of the other chord, right? But you know, it's good to see it both ways, right? You don't want any mysteries here, because the more mysteries you have, the more room for mistakes you're going to make. So with D flat, we have it here. Right? And I'm just straight up thinking from there, just like C, like I said, up a half step. So you have... right? And then back to C. Right, then we have the turnaround lick here. And then there's your E minor 7 flat 5. And then A7 is just like this. All right, so let's get into the melody here, right? So we have, and this is also, I can't remember if we've done this in here, but this is a great jazz device. So what you call this, you arpeggio up and you scale down, right? It's just part of the language. It's been used forever with jazz. So our first lick is arpeggio up, right on the downbeat, 1 and 2, and then we do scale down. Now Now, some of you might be going, well, what scale down is he using? Now, remember what I said earlier, right? D minor 7 is it is diatonic, right? That is the second chord if you did a harmonized chord scale in the key of C. So all it is a C scale. And I kind of talked about this with modes too. Like, people think, oh, modes are like complete different scales and stuff. It's like, no. It's just you start, basic modes. You start, if you're in the key of C, D becomes a Dorian, which has the raised sixth. Phrygian has like the flat 2 or the flat 9 kind of sound. It's all C scale, right? It just depends on which note you start. So and those are basic. I mean, there's all kinds of different melodic minor modes and stuff, and that can get pretty heavy, theory harmonically. But here we have arpeggio up, C scale, right? We're not going that far, but we have right? And then what I do is I slide in. So what that is called is a lower chromatic neighbor, right? So what I'm doing is I'm going 1 and 2, arpeggio, D minor 7, scale down, and then I chose to grab the 9 of the D minor 7 or the E note. And then what do I do is I'm sliding in by a half step, because you always want to be thinking ahead, right? And what note is that? Well, that's the F note. Now, in terms of G, it's the flat 7, but what am I targeting to manipulate this 5 chord? I'm targeting the D flat, right? So that's the third of that chord. So you have, right? Then the fifth. Now remember, this is coming straight out of the arpeggio. D flat. Right? So I have lower chromatic neighbor, up a half step. That kind of builds a little tension. Root. Third, fifth, flat 7. Now that's the 9, right? Which works because we're dealing with a Lydian dominant scale. So what a Lydian dominant scale is, it's a major scale. It's dominant, so it's got the flat 7 or the minor 7th, right? There's no half step between the root and that. It's a whole step. And then the also difference is we have the sharp 11. Right, that's Lydian, which is the fourth mode, which would, if we, we're in C and we played an F scale coming from C, the 4 would be sharp, right? So we have, and then all I do is I walk down. So we have root, flat 7, 6, right, 5, and then we're at beat 1 of C again, and that would be the sharp 11 to the D flat, or the flat 5, right? But in this case, it is the 5th of C, right? So altogether we have, right, so arpeggio up, scale down, 9 of that, and then lower chromatic neighbor, really. I move up a half step, which gives it that slight tension, but then that's the third of D flat, right? So we have 5th, flat 7, 9, root, 5, 6, 5, and then back to C, right? So here's how it's going to sound. And it's good to count this kind of stuff because it just takes, there's no second guessing, right? Whoops. Right, so we got. There we go. So there's our first part, right? Now, with the second part, we have that quick turnaround, which is E minor 7 flat 5 to A7. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stay in the second position. So we're seeing arpeggio here. Right? I'm also looking at it like this as well. And I'm kind of doing like sort of a scale. and a part arpeggio, right? But here's my E note, right? So I'm already right here. Boom, 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 root, flat 3, flat 5, flat 7, root, flat 3, which is the G note, B flat is flat 5, and then flat 7 is the C note. And what I do is, it's like I said, it's kind of a scale thing. So we have bum, 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 bum. And that's a C sharp. So also, you know, I do see it like that a lot. I also see it like this. A7, right? Which is the grip that nobody ever uses for chords, but it's the C shape. Or I'm sorry, the G shape of A, right? So that's what's going on there. We have bum, 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 C sharp, E, 3rd, 5th, and then we go back down bum, 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 to root, and that's for the A7, right? Now that's a little quicker. It's not whole bar, it's a half bar, 2 beats apiece for each chord. So all together we have bum, 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 C, 2, 3, 4. Here comes the E minor 7 to the A7, or the minor 2, 5. 1. Right, kind of a nice little tense moment. Remember, all that is chord tones, right? It's just we're turning it back around to the D minor. And the reason why that's used so much in jazz, right, is because what is A to D, which is where we're going? Well, it's the 5, right? And this is why the 2-5 is such a works so well with jazz. And some people say, I don't really necessarily agree with this. And you can ask me about that later too. But some people will say, oh, if you just learn a bunch of 2-5 licks, you can play jazz. And there's some truth to that, some of it isn't. It's important to understand how each chord works harmonically. Like I said, if anybody has a question about that later, I'd be happy to discuss. But yeah, right there. Boom, boom, boom. Chord tones. All chord tones. Maybe I said it wasn't. It is all chord. Right? Boom, 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 boom. D flat. Pretty tense. Then you're home safe, right? And it's you got that great tension and release there. E minor 7 flat 5. Boom, 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 boom. E minor 7, A7, all 8th notes. Right, and now we're on to our second part of the progression. Right, so let's listen to that really quick. Okay. So now what we're doing, here's from the beginning. E minor 7 flat 5, A7, C, or I'm sorry, D, D minor, just straight resting on a root note. So there is our, that's our F melodic minor, right? Now remember too, and I'm sorry, I completely slipped on this, if you look at the material, right, we have those scales laid out. So let me, just before we move on, one sec. Let's see. Yeah, so D flat Lydian, right, we're using that 4th position. And this is the whole scale. Like, we're only using parts of it, but it's also important to see that. So we did the arpeggio. So just real quick, guys, if we could pull up D flat Lydian dominant 4th position. Now, the thing is about these scales, these are going from root to root. Are somewhat, yeah. Let me see. Sorry, I'm trying to juggle screens. But we have this, right? Root, 2nd, 3rd, sharp 11, 5, 6, flat 7, root, 2nd, 3rd, sharp 11, C, Right, so we're pretty much using the entire position up to there. So we're back on the 6, right? But that's, look at that for sure. That's where it's coming from. And then we do stop there, right? Now it would extend down, you could. And you've heard me say that a million times. It's always good to look at your scales from front to back like that. Meaning, right there. And then you see the notes, right? Then C, bum, 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 bum. All right, so now we're into the D here. So the next scale, what we're gonna do, like I mentioned in the beginning, is we're taking the F melodic minor and putting that over the G chord, right? So here's how I'm looking at that, and if we could pull up this scale, let's see. So this is gonna be F melodic minor in first position, right? And I'm starting from the bottom, or the higher register, and going down, because really we're just using this register, but it's good to see the whole scale. So remember, melodic minor, it's a big fancy name. All it is a major scale with a flat third. Now it gives you a super cool sound, and I've always found kind of melodic minors, the fingerings can be a little funky, depending on positions and stuff. I don't think this one's too bad, but I don't know. If you ask me, that's how it's always been. But from there, right, we have... Right, and everything's marked out for you. Right, so major would be... But instead we have... You have right to there. Flat 3, 2, root, and then so on. Right? So what we're doing here is we have a whole note. Right? So we have, from the beginning we have... Right? So D minor 7. G, but D flat, C, E minor 7 flat 5, C, or A7, sorry, D, and then, right, I'm not going to use D flat here, I'm going to use the F melodic minor, so I go, and then I end on C there again, and then we're going to get into our fancy chord stuff. So if you can see, if you look at the scale, also let's look at the arpeggio, right? Just straight up F minor. And what I'm doing is I'm just picking it in first position because that's the closest one that I find very easy to see, right? So, right, now it's a little funky sound, but remember we're manipulating the 5 chord like that. So that's what we want. And what I'm doing here is we have D minor 7. Then I'm using the major 7th of F melodic minor, which is also the 9, or sorry, the 13 of G, which is a fine note to use, right? So we have, right, and then major 7, 5th, flat 3 of F melodic minor. So and then we just repeat that twice. And then I keep that note. Why? Because we're back on the C chord, which is the 3rd, right? I think I already said this. I'm going to say it again. I've probably said it 100 times. It's really good, I think, to, first of all, I like to think in numbers because you don't have to think like a bunch of notes. And that's also really helpful for like the number system. That's why it was invented, right? Like you could write out a chord chart and then if, the vocalist comes in for the session and, somebody's having a bad day and says, hey, can we bump it up a half step? Not everybody's out there with their pencils writing in, E flat, or well, if we're in C, right, the case would be D flat up a half step. Sometimes it's easy to transpose that in your head, but there is room for error, right? That's why numbers are great. 1 is always 1, 2 is always 2, you know, etc., right? So we have D, 2, 3, 4, boom, 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 boom. C right there. Right? And that's your F melodic minor coming from, remember, just major scale with flat third. 2, 3, 4. Now we have our fancy little chords like we learned earlier, so we jump all the way up here to kind of build that line down. Right? E minor 7, flat 5, A7. And then what we're going to do is we're going to repeat the usage of the D flat Lydian dominant scale, but we're moving it up a position or two, right? So we have, so now we're on D minor 7 again, right? So 1, and I use a triad just straight up coming out of this, right? 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and now D flat, right? There's your C major 7, or your C6, right? So arpeggio-wise for that, always look back at your arpeggios. Here's your D minor. And then, obviously, G would be here. But we're using D flat. So just like the A down here, I'm thinking of it from this position. And also, real quick, let's pull up the D flat scale in that position. So that's 6th position, right? And I have it from the higher register to the lower because that's where we're pulling from the lick, right? But actually, I find that one pretty easy to get under your fingers. Right, so there's our scale there. Spend some time with that for sure, but just for sake of time too, let's go back to the example chart. One sec. There we go, right? So we have, what is that? That's straight up C scale. Remember, D is diatonic, right? So D arpeggio, then I start in the root and I just walk straight up the scale. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, flat 7, which is C, right? Shift up a half step to grab the D flat, right? And what's cool about this is like, it's like you're going up, right? Even though like chord-wise you'd think D to, you know, D flat is going down, but that's what gives it such a cool sound, right? Straight down the scale there, just like on the example for the 6th position D flat Lydian scale. And then we're back to C. So then instead, dun, 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 I find a half step up is the 3rd of that chord, right? And then for the E minor 7 here, I do this cool little triplet thing where I go, right 9 to, root to flat 7 to flat 3 of E minor 7, right? Dun, then back to the root. And then I grab the C sharp, which is the A7, right? The 3rd of the A7 there. So all together from the top. 1, 2, 3, 4. 2, 3, 4. D minor 7. Now F melodic minor over the G7. 2, 3, 4. Fancy chord. 2, 3, 4. D minor 7 triad, then scale up. D flat, 6th position. Back to C. 2, 3, 4. Boom, boom. The little triplet lick over the E minor 7, flat 5. Then C sharp, right, for the A7. And And then now we're at the final turnaround, right? So super simple. What I do is I go D minor to G7. I'm literally using the root and the fifth. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Also, just going back to harmonic devices and techniques for creating melodies and stuff, right? Even though this is more like a sort of lick, session here, it's good to break it up. We're using a lot of straight eighth notes, right? So you want some space. So I'm doing a dotted quarter to an eighth here. So we have 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Now, right, D minor 7, bum, 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 G7, right? So what is that? Well, see, this can be both, and this is why music is fascinating in ways. We're on the G7, so I'm literally going bum, bum, root to fifth, bum, 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 of D minor 7. Now I'm at G, so what I'm doing is I'm grabbing the third, and instead, that's the flat 9 of G, which can work over a 5 chord. Is it tense? Absolutely. But also, and this is what I encourage everybody to do, that's also the flat 7 and the fifth of D flat, right? So there's your D flat again. And then I land on the G because we're back to C. Now there's no turnaround here again. All we do, we have 2 bars of G, then the second tag, and then I do the same thing. I go, then I move it up, right? So it doesn't sound boring. It's like, here we go. We're moving up, note-wise. Now it's same thing, right? D flat. There's your third of D flat, the F note, and there's your flat 7. But it's also the flat 7 of G and the third of G, right? Like I said, there's a lot in common with those with those 2 chords. But, if you use them in the right places slightly, you can build some tension. I mean, really, I think maybe the most tense thing in this whole thing is when you go, but I love it because it does resolve. That's also why I said from the beginning it is an acquired taste. You don't have to use it, but know that it's out there. If you're playing with somebody and that happens, that's what's going on, right? So we have, right? Equally G or D flat. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now let's start with that and then move up again. We have this is the second tag again, right? Now we're at C again for 2 bars. Now here's the finale. 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then we're done. Now this, like I said, another fascinating thing. If you crunch the numbers. That's straight up D minor 7. Third, flat third to root. Now that is a flat 9. That is an A flat note, right? To G. But what does that also equal? It's also the flat third of the F melodic minor, right? So look at it either way. The thing is it's the 5 chord, right? And this is my final riddle for this, if you will, right? You have choice. You can use either one. There's also other ones that we won't. We're just discussing these 2 today. But you see what I'm saying? However you want to look at it, it works. But that note, right? G chord, right? That's the flat third of F melodic minor. That's the fifth of D flat, and it's the flat 9 of G. And it's important, I mean, you should see it every way. And also, remember, you learn these scales, you take this track, just play through the scales, the F melodic minor and the D flat, like on the 5 chord. And you're going to start to find things. Of course, it's going to be a little hard to get under your, really in your ears sometimes, because it is sort of an acquired taste out there sound. But, you might like the way D flat, like this fingering, feels better, right, than this, right? So then, if you could figure out different ways to use that, manipulate that information, the better off you are, right? And really, the goal would be if you could figure out both and learn them in the different positions, that helps as well, right? So we have 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, second tag. 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, one more tag. 2, 3, 4, give it a breather. 1, 2, and there's your C6-9, right? All right, a lot of information, I know. Let's recap all that here, and then we can wrap up. So before we recap, right? Also, it was a pleasure teaching this course. I hope you guys learned a bunch. Ask me questions here, when we finish here in a second. Yeah, and like I said, just keep working on this. Remember too, it's important to do that. Like, don't just sort of learn it and forget it. Use the tracks without the melodies. The more you're going to learn about this. So, all right, here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. It would help if I turned that melody off, wouldn't it? All right, one more time. 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. C, E flat, melodic minor, fancy chords, D flat, the little triplet thing. Here we go. Same idea, then work it up. 2, 3, 4, final one. 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. And there you have it, my friends. That is manipulating the 5 chord. I hope that was cool. Like I said, Girl from Ipanema is another good one in this series to do that. We use G flat, so it's always good to, like I said, keep working on this stuff, refresh all that, get that under your hands too. But yeah, thank you everybody. Like I said, it's been a fun course. Yeah, let's get to some questions and we'll call it a day. All right, thank you. Hello, everybody. Austin Felingo here. Let's get to the question portion of the last lesson of creating jazz melodies. I hope you enjoyed it. We did some outside the box stuff today, talking about some stuff that we recapped from previous lessons, like the melodic minor scales, superimposing that over the 5 chord, as well as the tritone substitution. P. Simone says, can you talk more about the 16 inversions, as I mentioned? Yeah. So, I think this was also kind of brought up a couple weeks ago, but pretty much you have a root, you have a third, a fifth, and a seventh in the bass. That's going to rotate out within 16 inversions. So just for the sake of time here, kind of the best way to do it, so we talked about it, let's just keep it simple with the 7th chord. And the thing is before you put any of the color notes in, so I'm going to use a A7, right? Because we talked about the A7 flat 9. Remember, we talked about the half diminished chord first. Also, what's really important about, they're all really good to know, and you should learn them in sets of 4 on each sets of strings. But you know, they speak really well on the top 4 strings of guitar. So like a really easy way to do this, we had an A7 flat 9 right here, right? I talked about those fancy chords like E half diminished, A7 flat 9 with in the bass, and then we went. Right, so there was our lick and stuff. So what you want to do is, first of all, just figure out your A7. It always helps just to start from the lowest register. Just think of a cowboy chord. Right, so there's our A7. Right, so our first 4, really, we're used to playing A7 like this, right? But this is going to be E, which is the 5th in the bass, and the flat 7 on top. So you do kind of, it's good to do a little research on your own on this and figure out the actual shapes. But the first one, it was like an A with the 7th, right? And then the 5th in the root. So a lot of times you'll write it, it'll be like A7 R, you know, or 5 R, like 5 root, right? So E, right? And then after E, here's what's kind of easy about these, is they're always going to follow the same order. So after 1 root 3rd 5th, what did I say? We have a flat 7 or a dominant 7th, which is a whole step away from the root. So there's our A7 with the 5th in the bass, right? And this stems from this chord, right? But there's your flat 7 in the bass, right? So it's like a mini bar, really just coming out of that. And then we have our root, right? Root, 5th, flat 7, 3rd, right? And then from there, we have the 3rd, which sometimes it you know, it's stemming from this, the C shape, right? They're all going to kind of, in one way or another, come out of the cage system shapes. And I talked about caged a lot during this series, and that's why it's really important, because you could see all that, right? Like if we started low, here's A7, right? But it's coming from the A shape, right? Then it's coming from the E shape, coming from the D shape, right? So the more that you see that, the better off you are. Then coming from the C again, except it's a dominant 7, so it's here, right? And then you're back to 1. Or the first one, I mean, right? So you have that, A7 with the 5th in the bass, A7 with the flat 7 in the bass, A7 with the root in the bass, A7 with the 3rd in the bass, and then back up. And it's always good to kind of run those with the metronome or whatever in time, right? And then from there, what you can do is you could start simple and just make it like an A7 sus, you know? Right? Right, so you replace the 3rd with the 4th degree, the suspension, right? We all know how these sound, right? It's just, you're not usually used to playing chords like that. There's always like the tried and true shapes to do that with. But these always really help with line building. Like I was doing something the other day, and somebody just asked about like playing blues, like finger style blues, right? And rather, you know, than people thinking all these fancy licks, you can literally take like a finger pattern and go. See what I mean? Then go to the 4 chord. You see what I'm saying? And what you're doing is the highest note, you know, by using that, it's kind of your melody, and that's where you can build a line. But that's like an easy way to start with 7th chords. And when I mentioned that in the lesson, we had A7 right here with the root in the bass that was replaced with the flat 9, because like I said, it takes a Phrygian type scale right there, and it's a good color for that secondary dominant chord. So I hope that makes sense. And like I said, start with those top 4. I mean, those are the most common ones. And there are 16 of them. The second set isn't too bad. They get a little bit more kind of funky with some string skipping and stuff after that. But like I said, the top 4 always wins because it's the high register of the guitar, And just like I said, with that little, you can build lines like that. I mean, even if we took real quick, and then we have to wrap up here, but say you took, just what you could do then is you just replace each one with a flat 9. And like I said earlier, that makes it the diminished thing, which is a stack of minor thirds, which is also a minor third or every 3 frets on a guitar. And you're working, right? Because each one of these, right? You take your root and you replace it with the flat 9 right here. There's your root, replace it with the flat 9. Here, it moves to there. Here, there's your root, replace it. And on guitar, it works really well because it is always the same shape. But if you've ever wondered that, that's kind of the idea where those come from, is the 16 inversions. So, all right, remember everybody, this is all archived. So if, you can always go back. You have the materials, you have the tracks with the melodies and without. So, all right, thanks. Have a great day. Great question. And I will catch you down the road.